In this video, I'm going to be talking about some of the consistencies that I notice with the comic book artists that I like, the comic book and manga artists that I like. I personally like realistic art styles. I like realistic manga styles. I like realistic Western comic book styles. So I do like when there is like a good application of realism, even though the comic book art style or the manga art style is it's a stylized way of doing artwork. I still like prefer that style in contrast to like extremely exaggerated comic book art styles, right? That's just my preferences. You might have your own preferences, so I'm just going to talk about the things that I notice consistently in this artist art style. So what you like may be different from this, so you might personally prefer a different comic art style, and then you might have to do your own research to figure out the things you notice consistently with the art style so that it's going to suit you. But for me personally, these are the art styles that I like, and these are what I observed, right? The things that I'm going to try to implement in my own comic book, and my own comic book, and whenever I'm doing illustration in the comic book style. So that's what I'm going to talk about today. Let's get into it. The first thing I notice usually is the consistency in anatomy. I did a video a while ago, a very long time ago, years ago, where I talked about the fact that before you start, you need to figure out what you want to work on as an artist. You need to figure out where you're going to sort of specialize as an artist. So that could be like doing concept art, character concept art, or environment concept art, or your area could be machines, right? Machineries, or like prop design, or you could just be focusing on visual development. You could just be focusing on character illustrations alone, or you could be focusing on comic book illustrations, right? Or game character design. So things like that. You kind of have to pick not pick a niche, right? Just like pick one that you're going to specialize in, and then of course you have skills. You're an artist, you have skills in all these other areas, right? I've done character design, I've done visual development work, I've done like environment art, I've done like, but what I want, I've done portrait arts, like portrait paintings, but what I decide to focus on is comic book, right? I do all these other ones like to make a living, right? So that I can see food and pay the bills, right? So but you need to pick a specific area, right, that you're going to focus on. And why I say that is that so that you sort of know the pathway, because the things you're going to focus on learning once you've picked an area is going to be different from another area, right? So for comic books, it can be anatomy, it can be anatomy, then values, then perspective, right, then composition, right? These are the things that you need to like majorly focus on. Anatomy or structure, and then values, right, and then light and value, I mean, and then and then perspective, and then composition, right? You learn these things, and then you'll be a very solid artist. Like, you are not learning them at once in the sense that you're just downloading the information. You are learning them in the sense of that you're trying to learn the basics of each so that you can then apply it. And then once you see you're lacking in a particular thing, you then go back and then improve on it, right? For comic books, right, for environment, it could be different. You might need to learn perspective first, and then compositioning, right, and then you might need to learn values next, right? So simple things like that. So each area has sort of where they will focus on, and that's what I talked about in that old video, right? That's the reason why I'm talking about consistency in anatomy. For you to do comic books involves a lot of characters, right? A lot of characters, and for you to tell your story in a convincing and compelling way, you need to understand character expressions. You sort of need to understand character anatomy, right? You need to understand like things like micro expressions, how much detail to add in a character, and things like that, so that you can make your character feel real to your audience. It's something I'm still learning, but that's one thing I've observed about a lot of comic book artists that I like. And some of them are Jason Farbach, Jim Lee, what's his name, David Finch, Boichi, and Takehiko Inoue. These are like some of my favorite comic book artists. And Yusuke Murata. I like Yusuke Murata because of his fight scenes and like the angles that he uses during fights. Like he has very good use of perspective. So there's always consistency in anatomy, right? So and with anatomy, what that's why I did a lot of videos studying anatomy. If you check my videos, you see that I did a lot of videos studying anatomy where I just copy. That is how I study. I just copy. That's how I do it. And even like studying art styles, I just copy the artist's work and try to like copy it using my own character, and so that whenever I am drawing that character again, like in a comic book, I can sort of like make that same artistic decision. I can remember the artistic choice that the artist I was copying made and then apply it to my own art, right? And that's growth, that's improvement. So consistency in anatomy is the first thing. Apologies for rambling. That's just sort of how these videos are going to be, but I have to, all these things are interconnected, so I have to talk about it so that you just get the whole picture, right? The next thing I've noticed about them is that they do have great paneling, right? Like, what is comic book without great paneling? A lot of comic book artists, they pack a lot of visual data into panels, right? Especially when they need it. So like if there needs to be texture in a particular scene to really help the audience understand what's going on in that scene, they add that texture. So for instance now, a character's hair, for instance, maybe they need to show that maybe there's a bug on a character's hair. They may add a lot of detailing to the character's hair in that particular panel or scene, and then in the next panel they'll probably won't add that amount of detail, right? So that's where things like dense and spare panels come into play. Dense panels are panels that have like a lot of things happening in the panel. These are panels that where you could see a lot of elements at play, a lot of line work, there are a lot of people, there's a lot of texture everywhere. And in these panels, there's something like big, complicated, or exciting that is happening in that scene. So those are big panels. And usually they are panels that are like where things are crescendo. All right, so for instance, like two characters could be fighting and there could be like panel fights, let's say oh my goodness, I'm using the wrong pen. Let's say this is a panel, right? These are the two panels, right? And let's say in this panel, two characters are fighting, right, in this scene, right? They're fighting in this scene, like characters are fighting, right, in this scene. And for whatever reason, the character's hands show in this panel, right? Let's just use that as character hands. It shows in this panel, and then the next panel is of the character that he's fighting, maybe crashing into like a building. So there's glass here, there's glass there, something like this. There's glass everywhere, something like this. So there's a crash of the character, so something like this, right? So this is a dense panel, right? This is a dense panel. Or we could even do a panel where different superheroes are fighting each other, right? In these panels, right? Different superheroes are fighting in this panel. Like we use this type of lines for fighting panels just to show motion, and the panels are close together so that you can show that the things are happening instantaneously. They are not taking a long time. Whenever you give spaces between panels, you can use spacing like to sort of like tell the timing of events like in a comic book, right? So that's just something to note, by the way. That's part of the things that they do use, like this skilled comic book artists. It's part of the things that they use. So like these superheroes could be fighting in all these scenes, right? They could be fighting in all these panels, and all of a sudden something dramatic happens. Maybe there is like a new character that just lands in a superhero pose like this. A new character lands in a superhero pose like this, and then every superhero is just flying about. Every superhero is just flying, and like there's a huge impact. I know, maybe he's a giant. Let's say he's a giant. So all the superheroes are just flying about, right? So this is a dense panel. Maybe cars are flying here and there. There's crack in the ground, something like that, right? So there's impact. Something as simple like this, right? So within these panels, right, there could be dense activity, there could be dense panels, right? And There could be spare panels, maybe a character's eyes, right, like opening wide before an impact, before it like takes a blow or takes a punch, something like that. And then so there could be dense panels over here, right? But this is another example of a dense panel as well, right? And then there could be spare panels over here as well. And then also there could be spare panels that are also splash pages, right? Or maybe like it just depends on, like, for me, I like to spam splash pages or dense panels where I just show a lot of things happening. It takes a lot of effort, like it consumes a lot of time, but usually it's to distract people from the fact that I'm not that great at storytelling using paneling and like using like the sequential art form, like the comic book art form. So what I usually do is that after every like 4 or 5 pages, I would just like do like a splash page to just like make people just say, oh, here's the cool art, all right, back to the story, right? So something like that. That's what I do personally. So but not when I work on other people's projects. Not when I work on other people's projects, because they've written the story, and there's an art direction, so I already know what to do. So I just like draw exactly what they tell me to draw. I don't need to be creative about it. But when I'm working on my own comic, my friend, he will write the paneling, but sometimes do I just do what they call oversabi in Nigeria, right? Trying to form like I know more than what is already established, and I just do too much. Basically, it's just me doing too much. But anyways, back to this. So they use dense and spare panels really well. Another thing is that, like, because when you, like, even if, because I did mention the fact that they can be dense panels even here, right? So maybe when you can put dense panels next to spare panels, right? And what this does is that it creates contrast in storytelling, and it directs the speed, how fast the reader goes through the page, and how much time a reader spends on a single panel. If a panel has just a boy standing, right? Just a boy in a medium shot standing. Just like, oh, a boy in a medium shot standing, cool, right? But then if you put a boy in a shot like this standing, but then he's not alone, then they're like superheroes around him, right? Maybe one superhero flying here, another superhero here, another superhero here, right? Maybe he's holding his teddy bear, right? Maybe he's holding his teddy bear, and like maybe there's like fights around him happening, like this superheroes, there's fights around him happening, and then we're seeing the environment he's in. There's cars over here like this, right? And then maybe the panel is just of him, of the character just saying, where's my mommy, something like that, right? And then there's all this superhero chaos going on around him, things are flying around and things like that. A panel like this, right, you could just put like maybe like the boy is walking. You could just put a spare panel where the boy is walking, right, where the boy is walking, and then another panel like going into detail about the character's teddy bear, and then you could put like a fist which could represent like superhero fighting, something like that, right? And then you then put the boy. I'm coming up with this on the fly, so bear with me. And then don't put a scene of the boy crying, right? A scene of the boy crying like that, and he just says, there's a speech bubble that says, "Where's my mommy?" Something like that. So you can see spare panel, spare panel, spare panel, and then dense panel, right? And do spare panel, spare panel, spare panel, dense panel, right? Because of how much detail and information is in this spare panel, right? You are able to read through these 3 panels above very easily. You're able to read through them very easily and get your information across. You say, okay, there's a bit of suspense, right? There's a bit of suspense. So you go through this easily, and then you see these dense panels with a lot of things happening. So you spend more time in that moment with that child. So something like that is, very important. And, great artists that I've read, they use this a lot. Another thing is like, there is good hierarchy in the paneling, like panel hierarchy. Yeah, I just spoke about dense panels and spare panels, right? It's still, they are still connected. That's why these are subtopics under it, right? So like with when you look at a comic, right? A comic is sort of like it's a medium of like telling a story. It's another medium of telling a story, and like with everything about telling a story, there are lows and there are highs, right? There are place where you go slow and then you add your punchline, right? And the best way to do that is like with storytelling is like to apply all these techniques, right? The anatomy things I've talked about, and then the paneling is very important to telling your story. I've learned from that because I've made a decent amount of mistake. Not a lot because I haven't done a lot of comics, but I've done comics, so I have some experiences. So like with the big panels, right? Whenever there is a big panel, usually it's not all the time because you can do your comic the way you want, right? You don't have to. These are guidelines, right? You don't have to like stick to them 100%. I'm just noting a pattern that a lot of artists use, right? But usually big panels are used for like big moments, right? Example of big moments are like, for instance, there's an explosion or there's a dramatic reveal of a character, whether that be a superhero character or a villain character or a new character that nobody has ever seen, right? An example of another big moment is like maybe two characters are fighting, and then maybe a character uses a new technique that has maybe he has not used in a long time, something like that, and then maybe punching another character, making the punch land, something like that. So you need to put these events usually, or these highlights usually in big panel scenes. If you put them in small panel scenes, they won't be appreciated as much, and they won't tell the audience that that particular scene or that particular moment is impactful to the story, or like that particular moment has significance. So if you want a moment to have significance in your story, you have to be conscious of how you use your panels, right? You have to be conscious of your panel hierarchy, right? So the smaller panels are the panels, they are important as well because they help you get to the big moments, right? So you have to be conscious of that and select those really well as well. There have to be good panel use of like panel economy, right? Know how much panel detail is going to be in a panel, and how simple that panel is going to be, right? So an example of like an in-between moment in the sense of like small panels, right? Because these are the moments that help you get to the big moments, right? To the splash pages, to the explosion pages, to the superhero landing pages, right? An example of that is maybe before a fight scene, right? Two characters before a fight scene, there's a clenching of the fist, right? Kind of similar to what I was talking about in this area, right? Where we have like this character over here that is walking on the street, right? That's walking on the street with his teddy bear hanging like this, right? And then like we show like a fist, something like that, and the sky or something, and then we finally show with a big panel the scenes, the things that is happening around the scenes. So that's an example of like a small panel, right? So in a fight scene, like I said, it could be like of a character like clenching his fist before a fight, like maybe holding tight to his sword, right? I did a something. Let me just do a panel. So like in this panel, like two characters standing to fight, right? Character A, character B, right? And then there's a scene of this character holding his sword, like clenching fast to his sword or katana, something like that, clenching his fist, right? And then we zoom in to the character's eyes. These are in between panels. We zoom into the character's eyes, right? That is pissed off or sad or indifferent, depending on the emotion you want to pass, like between the character. Maybe this character could be pissed off, and then the other character's eyes could just be not interested, something like that, or sad about the situation, right? To use this to sort of tell what each character is feeling. This is an example of an in-between moment before the actual fight starts, and then before we move to the next phase of the story. Very important, right? Very important. These are the build-up panels. So another thing about we need to note about like paneling is so we've talked about dense panels, right? Dense panels, talk spare panels, panel hierarchy. The next thing we'll talk about is like cuts, panel cuts, or like movie inspired panel cuts. The way a lot of comic book artists in general look at comic book panels is like they look at it like movie shots, right? If you are like watching John Wick or something like that, and then you pause the video, right? That particular scene, right, is, we do sequential art, so like it's like capturing of moments, and you have to pick your moments. You have to be smart about how you pick your moments so that you can pick the right moments that are most impactful and tell the story as fast as possible and just keep the story moving forward, right? So they view comic book processes as like shots, as like movie cuts or movie shots, right? I mean camera shots. That's what I mean. So we have our close-up shots. We have our medium shots, and then we have what else? Our wide shots. Yeah, so close-up shots is when like the camera zooms in on a face, kind of what I was like talking about with regards to these two characters that are about to fight, right? So over here is a medium shot, right? We'll talk about it later. These two characters standing next to each other about to fight, holding their katana or sword or blade or whatever it is, right? So close-up shots are when like the camera like they zoom into the face or the hand or wherever there's a place of impact. For instance, let's say like if you look at like the Invincible fight scenes, right? There's usually this technique that the viewer might use where they just carry their fingers, their hands, and just like put it through like a person's innards, like a close-up of that, to show the impact of what has happened. You see the camera angle or like the paneling, they'll zoom into the character who has like his intestines spilled out up and down all around the places, right? Those are close-ups. Or let's say two characters are having conversation, just simple, nothing intense, right? But there's like a battle in like the conversation, right, in the words, and then you show the micro expressions of the characters. Maybe you show a character smiling, like making a smirk, right? The paneling, maybe the character is making a small slight smirk, something like that, right? Maybe that might be all that will be in the panel, right? Or you do a close-up of the character's eyes, right? Or how the character is talking, right? Maybe spittle coming out of the character, a character that's in pain. So something like that, right? That's what close-ups are for. Wide shots are shots that are done usually to show environment or what's going on, or like a location, maybe like a lot of people in a street, to show a big battle scene, to show like a skyline or like a place. You usually see this in comics. The same thing with movies, right? Like maybe spy movies or movies in general, right? They show like a top view or panoramic view of the environment, right? You see, okay, they show like a view, a skyline, and then they would type the location of that area that the scene that is about to take place in is taking place in, right? Something like that. So that's what wide shots are usually used for. They are used to like show the environment the character is in and the situation of things, and then you then move into medium shots, which is sort of like is good for showing the action that is about to be taken, or the in-between action that is about to be taken. So these are very good. So like for instance, now let's use a character. For instance, what they say, let's use let me divide this right into three. So we have wide shot, right? We have wide shot of this battle that is happening here, right? Let's say it's in a farm, for instance. So we have our trees, right? We have our trees over here like this, and then let's say I could put a lizard like this, right? And then we'll put leaves over here. This is the foreground, and then we'll put the two characters over here like this. This is character one, this is character two, and then there's grass all around like this, right? There's grass all around like this. And then these are our two characters, by the way. So just put the characters here, just put the grasses depending on how they are moving or how high the grasses are. And then you could put like huts around them, something like that, like huts around them to sort of show the location. Maybe it's a village, right? They're having a fight in a village, something like that. And then you could then put maybe mountains, right, behind them, right? Mountains behind them, and then you could maybe put a moon, right? Put a moon to show that maybe it's night time, right? Maybe it's nighttime, right? And then this is a wide shot. So we are telling the story of like the events that is happening, like what's going on, right? The location. And then maybe you could put the location, you could put you could say maybe it's Do Village, something like that, Do Village. And then the next scene, right? So this is a wide shot. The next scene could be a medium shot, right? Medium shot you could then do of the two characters, right? We're seeing the two characters standing next to each other, holding their swords or their weapons, something like this, holding their weapons like this, about to fight, holding their weapons about to fight. And then if you want, you could then put like a perspective, put like the village behind them, something like that, if you want, depending on the perspective or the angle. But usually it's better to just focus on the two characters and the moment, since we've already established the location in the wide shot. And then finally, depending on the main character or the villain character, whoever is the point of view we are telling the story from, we could then zoom into the character, right? You could then do two close-up shots even, right? Like I said, you then zoom into one of the character's eyes. Let's make it a side view. You could then zoom into the character's face like this, and then zoom into the character's face, and then zoom into the other character's face. Let's give him a beard. And maybe he's just like surprised or something, or baffled at the situation, right? So yeah, something like this, right? And then we've told a good and cool looking story using three shots. We've used the wide shots, we've used the medium shots, and we've used the close-up shots. So this is something I notice consistently that good artists use. Another thing is I would call it gutter choreography. Gutters are the space in between like comic panels. So if the gutters are small or they're tiny and they are like close to each other, the reader's eyes will move quickly from one panel to another. And so like whenever the gutter space, right? So this is a panel. This is a comic book page, right? This is a comic book page, and these are panels in a comic book page, right? And whenever the gutters are the spaces in between these panels. This is the gutter, right? This space is over here in between these panels, right? These are the gutter. So like however large that those, like, of course, like I was talking about the dense and the the dense and the spare panels, right, can also affect the speed of the reader, right? How quickly the reader goes through a work. So, right, but also the spaces between each gutter, right, between each panel can also affect it. So that's why whenever you see fight scenes, just go look at any fight scene, right? You see, apart from the shape of the panel, which also helps, like it is done in a dynamic way to sort of show that there's action, right? There's movement, right? There's intense movement. That's not always done, but that's mostly done, right? The panels are usually closer together. Not all the time, but usually they are closer together. So instead of creating, like, there's a panel, right? So instead of creating like a gap, huge gap like this between these two panels, panel 1, panel 2, they close the gap between the panels. So they could just make it one moment like this, right? Something like this. And then they could do the panels closer depending on how swift the action is taking place. So let's say there's fighting, right? And then let's say maybe there's a contact or something happens, and then there's let's say they stop fighting and maybe there's a moment of calm. the space between these panels is going to help your reader eyes relax a bit in the moment, and like maybe for this character to get up or and get back into the fight, something like that. So the paneling can also affect the timing of the story. So like if the gutters are big, or there's like a big space in between the panels, the readers are going to slow down and take a moment, and it kind of feels like a comma. When you're writing, there's a comma, right? It kind of feels like a moment to take a breather while reading the story during the process of intense storytelling, right, in the scene. So, they use good gutter choreography during the scenes. Another thing they use, like in terms of the paneling, is overlapping elements. I really like this a lot whenever I see it in comics, right? Maybe you could see like a panel like this, right? And then there's a new character that is introduced. Maybe he's folding his hands, something like this. That's not good. Maybe he's folding his arms, and maybe it's like a full body of the character, right? The character is posing, and then his posing is also like overlapping the panels. These are panels. His posing is overlapping the panels. Um, Let me reduce the size of this book. His posing is like overlapping the panels, and what this does is that it kind of shows that this character, maybe there's characters talking, right? Characters talking, characters talking, characters talking. Maybe it's him still talking in these scenes, right? What this does is that it still shows that this character, right, subconsciously, that this character is in this scene because of how his body is overlapping all these characters. For instance, you can see this in scenes where, let's say, like maybe a character is running, and then let me just show you. Maybe a character is running for his life. Maybe a character is running for his life, right? A character is running for his life, and then they show the pursuer, the person who's chasing him. In this case, it could be his mom, right? She's chasing him with her slippers, right? His mom is chasing him with her slippers, something like that, and she then throws the slippers, right? Let's use this as a hand. She then throws the slippers like this. This would be her slippers. This would be her slippers. She then throws the slippers in the scene, right? And then the slippers in the scene, you can then see our character's head right next to it like this, probably looking at the slippers that is about to hit his head, right? So this is her hand. This is her hand throwing the slippers, right? But then you can see the slippers is overlapping this panel over here like this. This element overlapping this character over here, and you can see it's about to hit our character. So you could just show the speed of the slippers in this final place, smacking our character on the head, and then he's flying and falling down, something like that. Hope that made sense. So yeah, you could use overlapping elements like this, and it could just add a bit more interest to your comic book panels. I've seen this a lot in comic books, and it's really helpful to make your scene look a bit more interesting, a bit more graphic, and nice to see. Another thing is like with it is like using like foreshortening and perspective in panels to sell speed. A lot of these artists, they use this technique a lot, right? So for example, whenever someone throws a punch in a movie, it usually goes straight at the camera, right, making the face look huge. So like if I were to like throw a punch like this, right, you can see how like this perspective, right, perspective is at play, right? So my hands is quite larger than my face. So this is a camera shot on its own, right? So a scene like this, you could add this into a panel, and because of, and then add like some motion lines around the hands, right? So you could use a shot like this to sell that a character is about to get punched, right? And then in the next panel, you show the impact of that action the other character took, right? So that is using perspective, right, and camera angles to cell speed in a character. Sometimes you could use like a fish eye perspective. I think Tatsu Yukinobu, the guy who did what's the name of this manga? Dan Da Dan. He uses fish eye perspective a lot, like to show like fight scenes, and like to show the intensity of the motion that is at hand, to show how much like impact a scene, the action is going to happen, is going to, how much of an impact the action in a scene is going to have in the next panel. So he uses this a lot. So yeah, so that is one way that comic book artists use to make their paneling a bit more interesting. When an artist uses an extreme angle, right, it makes the action feel fast and intense. And like for instance, if I were to throw a pen towards you, right, and like you can see how close this is to the camera, and because of how I throw it, let's say I throw it, right, and this pencil could be floating like this, and then my pose could be like this, right, because of like my pose is already established and this is running towards the camera, and how big of this like pen is going to show appear in the camera, and then in the next scene is going to sell how much speed this pen is moving at, and then in the next speed in the next scene in the next panel you can then show the impact of me throwing this pen, right, whether I'm throwing it to kill a fly or something like that, or to hit on someone's eye or something, whatever effect I want to achieve, you show that in the next panel, but you sell the speed and the movement of this pen, right, using perspective and foreshortening. Yeah, so that's one thing they use a lot. So another thing they use, I'm going to mention again, is they make use of like what they call silent panels. They use silent panels to add weight to a scene. So some panels are, you don't always need to draw. You can use because contrast already exists in the paneling that you're drawing, right? So some panels don't need to have a lot going on. So two people could be conversing, right? There could be a panel where there's conversation going on, right? Two people are talking, and there's speech bubbles all around, right? Speech bubbles all around. And then maybe in this last scene, you then show the face of the character. Without, you just show the micro expression or the emotion of the character without necessarily maybe the character size or something, without necessarily adding any speech bubble or anything to the character, because you do this to make the readers pause and to show that the character is processing it, or to show how that character like feels in the moment. So this is something a lot of comic book artists do. Also, you can also because it's in the writing. Usually if the writers are doing it, if the writers are doing their job well, they will take note to add it. I'm just saying it because most comic book writers, most people that do comics, especially if they are doing it independently, they do start on their own, so they do the whole writing on their own. So these are some like great things to note. Another thing they do is really skilled comic book artists that I've noticed with a lot of these artists that I've talked about is economy of background, right? I should have just put BG. Economy of background, right? So when things are moving fast, or where there's like serious motion, because I'm talking about fight scenes a lot. I've probably talked about that a lot. When things are moving fast in a story, right? A lot of the times it's not necessary to add the background. Like sometimes, like I said, sometimes when the characters are conversing and you are focusing on the characters, you don't necessarily need to add the background all the time, every single time, in every single panel, right? Or when characters are fighting, right? Sometimes because of the speed the characters are moving at, you don't need to add the background. It will just distract and take away from the moment that the two characters are sharing together in violence, right? So it takes away from, because any you have to learn to direct focus in your story whenever you are doing paneling. So you draw less things so that whatever is being seen is what is being focused on, right? Yeah, so that's just another thing. Another thing is like repeating panels with small changes. Most times, to show, like for instance, now maybe like in scenes, I'm using fight scenes a lot. I apologize, but there are other. But I read a lot of like fighting stories. But like in scenes where, let's say characters are fighting each other, and let's say one character is moving at like superhuman speed to show like the effect, right? This probably explains my lack of the my deficiency in like having knowledge in a variety of this stuff. So I only know about fighting, so I apologize for that. I'm also learning as well. So whenever artists um sometimes artists repeat a pose in different panels, right, so that be able to build they can be able to build tension in that moment. An example is like in an angle, like in a punching angle, right? An example of this can be what example can I use? Like with Spider-Man, for instance, right? Let's use Spider-Man. When Spider-Man, Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man, where he was trying to, that sad scene where he was trying to catch Gwen, and then there was this, his web was sort of like stretching like an arm, right, to catch her, and then it was not able to, and then she falls, and then like maybe he does catch her, but he catches her too late. But by then the impact of his web pulls her up, and she hits her head, and like she dies, right? So that moment, that scene, right, could be an example of a repeating panel with small changes, right? So you could see the I should really draw this, but you could see the web coming out like this, like a hand, right? Let me just draw hands, man. What am I doing? You could see the web, like just one scene, right, of the hand, of the web, I mean. I'm just going to do this like this. I'm just going to use this, of the web trying to reach her. So what you could do is that you could then add like motion in the background like this, the web trying to reach her, something like this, and then it eventually like catches her body. But then you could then add a sound effect like a smack or something like that. Let me write it in another color. You could then add like a smack. So this has already created curiosity. It has already created suspense in the story. It has already created a cliffhanger, because we are seeing this stretching, this repeating panels, right? The panel is repeating over and over and over and over again, and then it finally accomplishes what it wants to do. But then you then hear this smack sound. You may not even need to show her face, maybe just a part of her body, and then in the next scene you show the tragedy of the scene. So this has already created a lot of tension in the scene. Another thing you could do is that you could I don't know, or I'm thinking about a fight scene. Maybe like a character is stood in a single pose, but because of the speed of the other character, you begin to see. So yeah. So I'm going to show you. For instance, I have it. So there's this panel, continuous panel, right, over and over again, and then you show this character's face, right, his eyes like this, show his eyes like this, but then you show like a bullet coming closer, then you show the bullet coming closer like this, and then the next thing you do is that you show his head like this, tilted like this, and then you then show like his brain, I said brain, splattering because the bullet is has passed through his head, something like that. So and then the bullet passing. So with this simple scene like this, we've been able to show tension, right? A character on his own, the bullets flying, right? and then the bullet passing like this, and then the character is down on the ground. So something as simple like this, you've used repeating panel to create tension and to create emotion and suspense in your reader. As simple as that. So another thing is that you can create, in terms of like panel hierarchy, you can create a cliffhanger effect. This will be the last one, a cliffhanger effect, in the sense that like right, let's still take this scene, right? So you could create a cliffhanger, right? So you hear so we have this character here like this, right, just standing just on his own, and then the bullet is flying, right? And then the bullet is still flying, it then comes really close to him like this, and then you show the eyes, of the character looking at it, right? Maybe something close, maybe it's a character that has super speed as well, right? You show like the penetration of the bullet, something like that. When you do a scene like this, right, you've created cliffhanger, right? So the audience would want to know what would happen to this character, so they will have no option than to turn and flip. Another way you could do it is that you could do it based on the scaling of the paneling, right? So this same scene, right, this same scene, one, two, three, four panels, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. So you could do something like this, where we have this character here on his own like this, then the character is here, still here on his own, the bullet is flying, the bullet comes close. What am I doing? The character is on his own, the bullet is flying, right? The bullet comes close, right? And then you show the character's eyes, something like that. The character's eyes, like just looking, the character looking, right? And we're like, what's going to happen next? And then we'll have to flip, right? So you could do this with just simple page sizes, right? Maybe something's about to happen in a scene, and then we make the sizes of the panels even, but then we make this last panel very small, and then it makes us very curious. So maybe like a sniper assassin is about to take a shot, and then in the last scene we show the gun shooting, and then we put like a blam. Let me use a different color. We put like a blam on the scene, and then we know that he has shot the gun, but what's the effect of what he just did, right? And we would want to see the effect, and then we'd have to flip the next page. So these are some panel techniques that I've noticed. I just put 2. I'm sure there are a lot more that people use that I haven't talked about, but the comic book medium is a vast medium. I'm still learning about it. I don't know a lot about it because of my inconsistency in making comics myself. But these are the things that I've learned, and I just wanted to share that with you. And if you learned something from the video, please give it a like. If you have any questions or contributions, or any more, like you have contribution in the sense of like you have other techniques or that I didn't point out, or you want to expand more on these techniques, just let me know. I'm also here to learn as well. I'm just like sort of documenting my learning process, and these are the things that I've learned. There's always consistency in anatomy and great paneling. With just these 2 things, you can tell a very nice story with your comic, right? And it's a continuous learning process. It's not something that you just learn for now, but you just apply these little things over and over and over and over again, these little techniques over and over again, and you become a better comic book artist, and you're able to create amazing panels, amazing stories with just these techniques. And of course, always be open to improvement. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. I really appreciate it. We're trying to get to 2K, so help a brother out. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. Please help me out, subscribe. And I'll see you in the next video, and stay creative, guys.